Everywhere you look, they're telling you not to overreact to small sample numbers this early in the season. But if you know where to look, you'll be enlightened. Let's dive into some small sample pitch mix and shape changes that all tell us something about the state of pitching in 2026. We'll start with a popular dark horse Cy Young pick to unseat Tarek Skubal for his third consecutive award. Well, maybe it's not that popular, but I think it's very much in play. Dylan Cease. He looked awesome in his Blue Jays debut and did so with a mix that 2022 Dylan Cease would be surprised that he was using. Back then, Cease threw 83% four-seam and slider, and as recent as last season, he was still throwing 85% four-seam and slider. In his Blue Jays debut, he threw just 64% four-seam and slider. He mixed in a ton of a new changeup, threw sweepers, threw sinkers. But let's flash back for a second. In trying to project Cease before this season, the question you should have asked yourself is how much do you believe he was responsible for every run he allowed? It's an odd question, but in trying to forecast performance, it's a crucial one to being accurate. A graph of his career ERA is a roller coaster, but if you look at what we'd call an ERA predictor that controls for what the pitcher has more direct control over, I like using Sierra here, which you could find on Fangraphs because it controls for the kind of ball and play a pitcher allows, like ground balls and fly balls. Cease had a blip in 2023, but has otherwise been a metronome. Projecting Dylan Cease out before this season was a gut check for analysts like myself. Are you comfortable staring at a pitcher who just posted a 4.55 ERA and telling yourself that he's a top 15 pitcher in baseball? I think you should have. The correct answer is yes, absolutely. I thought he was the top 15 pitcher before the season, but I'm more confident in it now than I was just a week ago. Why? Well, projections don't account for strategic shifts. So if we take his projection right now in this very moment for the rest of the season, it's built on what he's shown in his career and doesn't really care too much about one start's usage. 170 innings, 29% strikeout rate, 9% walk rate, 3.7 ERA. He's the top 15 pitcher in baseball. But I think the chance increased that he's going to be better than these projections, simply because his strategy is different. His mix is larger than we've ever seen. The guy who used to be a classic, he only has 2 pitches arm, is now a 6-pitch arm. Take a look at left-handed hitters against Cease over the last 3 seasons. He was notably worse from a swing and miss standpoint compared to right-handed hitters. In his Blue Jays debut, he threw 7 changeups for 15% usage to lefties. That's something he's done only 2 times over his last 98 starts. For a while, Cease had this weird low-velocity changeup that never really worked. I always called it his troll changeup. It was more of a gimmick than an actual pitch. And with the Blue Jays, he's finally up the velocity of this offering. It's never sat above 80 miles per hour in any of the last 5 seasons he's thrown the pitch, and it's now 83 plus. The velocity gap is still huge, but it's more of a viable changeup than the one I previously thought was pretty much useless. This changeup is going to help with the exact thing that he didn't do at an elite level over the last few seasons: miss lefty bats. Now, Cease has never had a problem with right-handed hitters, but he's evolving there too. More sinker, more sweeper, less reliance on that four-seam slider combination. The lesson here is a simple one. Mix expansion is still a thing, and even good pitchers who have stubbornly kept their repertoire small over the last couple seasons are caving. Last season, we saw a dramatic uptick in the diversity of repertoires by starting pitchers. Now, we're still waiting on 2026's numbers to stabilize, but what we see so far is much of the same. It's going to be another season where starting pitchers are throwing a bunch of different pitches. This trend is not going away anytime soon, especially with how good the league has gotten at pitch design and their understanding of ball flight and how seam orientation and grip can induce movement on a pitch that maybe a guy was never able to get to. But it's most interesting to me when you apply this to projections that look at a pitcher who's done the same thing over the last couple seasons, like a Dylan Cease, to the point where those projections are pretty confident you're just going to be the same guy you've been. The advantage you have as an analyst or a fantasy player or anything is whether you can ID something layered on top strategically that pitcher has changed, that maybe can convince you, hey, Dylan Cease might have a strikeout rate bump because he's a bit better now versus left-handed hitters, or hey, maybe the homers actually drop below, say, 0.8 per 9 on a home run per 9 basis because he's doing a better job keeping the ball on the ground versus right-handed hitters. Those are the ways that you can look at a pitcher that's top 15 in the league from a baseline projection standpoint and say, I actually think there's some untapped upside here. The same could be applied to the next guy I want to talk about, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. One of the first things you could do to understand a pitcher better than just looking at his results is to baseline him in terms of how good his stuff is and how good his command is. The best are above average at both, but the average starting pitcher is usually some combination of subtle variations around that average. I think the reason the is Yoshinobu Yamamoto an ace convo has come up recently is because he basically has average raw stuff when you consider just how his ball moves relative to his arm angle and the velocity he throws, but his command is exceptional. I think people who don't believe Yamamoto is an ace just only want pitchers with great stuff and great command and mostly throw aside the George Kirbys of the world or the Yoshinobu Yamamotos who are plus command artists with more average stuff. Yamamoto had the third best location plus in baseball among qualified pitchers last season, and in our incredibly small sample of 2026 innings, he is right up there again. Like our friend Dylan Cease, Yamamoto has progressively expanded his mix to right-handed hitters, mainly because he's had reverse splits for most of his major league career. He has crushed left-handed hitters, so you wouldn't really expect that a pitcher who is very good against a given handedness would do anything dramatically different, right? Well, it's not dramatic, but when I was looking at Yamamoto's first start, I noticed there were a number of sinkers to left-handed hitters. He only threw 9 sinkers to lefties last season, 9 in over 170 innings. And when I looked at the location of these sinkers in his debut, it immediately made sense. Yamamoto has ascended to the upper tier of command artists. He has begun throwing front door sinkers. Front door sinkers are reserved for only the best command artists in baseball because the natural miss is going to take you back over the heart of the plate where 70% of home runs last season happened. Think about it this way. You're a righty pitcher thrown to a lefty hitter. You want to front hip a sinker, get a called third strike, or even an early count called strike. So you start it at his hip and you run it back to the inner third for a called strike. But if your natural miss is just basically a couple inches beyond that, it's taking you right into the heart of the plate where all this damage happens. So you have to be able to corral your miss in a way that allows you to stay on that inner third of the plate. It's an extremely risky pitch. It's obviously very rewarding, but if Yamamoto misses on any of these and they go back middle, he's probably going to get barreled. Zach Wheeler and George Kirby do this a ton, but again, they're exceptional at commanding the ball. Their miss distance, as I just talked about, is just smaller than other pitchers, so the risk for them is worth taking. The lesson here that I always forget but remind myself of is that even when you're really good, you have to adjust to stay ahead of the league. Caleb Cotham and the Phillies do this better than anybody. The Yankees with Sam Breen and Matt Blake are also stellar at it. Zach Wheeler in particular has been one of the test cases that I always bring up. He's done something different every single season, despite the fact his results have always been exceptional. Yamamoto is in that tier of pitcher. He is an ace. Next, I want to talk about something Sarris of The Athletic brought up in my bold predictions video, so if you didn't see that, I'm going to throw to it right now. Listen to what he says here.
My bold prediction is that the number of pitchers with multiple changeups this year will double. It's not that bold because there are only 4 guys that throw a splitter and a changeup.
I love this bold prediction because when Eno confirms something that I was kind of thinking in the back of my head, I often feel really good. Eno's a really sharp guy. I had this in a video a couple months ago where I was talking about Jose De Leon, who's a lefty prospect for the Orioles who throws both a changeup and a splitter really effectively. He's really good natural command of his changeup. The reason I think Eno is bringing this up is related to the idea of mixed expansion that we've already hit on with guys like Dylan Cease and Yamamoto, but I want to get a bit more specific. In other videos, I've talked about this concept of pronation and supination. Basically, every pitcher pronates after they throw. You can see this as their arm action kind of turns over post ball release. But when that pronation happens, the timing of it is pretty crucial to determining what shapes you can create. Those who get to pronation early are often called pronators. Their typical mix is a good fastball, a good changeup, not too much in the way of breaking balls. Pitchers who delay that pronation longer in the throw are called supinators. They're naturally on the side of the ball more at release. Their typical mix is strong breaking ball shapes, and when you get into what we call super supinator territory, which I think I just made up, those extreme cut ride fastball shapes appear. Think of Cade Horton or Sonny Gray. The mixed revolution in baseball that I've been hammering on this channel, in prior videos, and even in this video, is tied to those who supinate well. Teams are seeking out these types because they can get them to a number of strong shapes, presenting more problems for hitters, especially when they have massive spin capacity or interesting releases. Think about Nolan McLean, Connolly Early. There's a number of pitchers in the league right now that fall into this supinator category. What I find interesting is that during the last draft cycle, as I was talking to some folks in baseball about what they prioritize with collegiate pitching prospects, when I brought up names that were more on the pronator side of the spectrum, so they got through the ball, good fastball, good changeup, some orgs kind of turned their nose up at those types, thinking that they wouldn't be able to do much, especially if that guy was maxed out from a body standpoint to make him dramatically better. But I don't know if I was asking the correct questions here, because I wonder if what we're trying to solve for now in baseball is how to make everybody throw 6 or 7 pitches. It's easy to do that with supinators. That seems like a layup in the current state of the game. I think it's a bit harder to do it with these pronator types, but it doesn't mean that these pronator types can't do that. And I think that's what Ina was getting at with this prediction. These guys don't do a good job of creating strong breaking ball shapes. You could split the slider into a cutter and a slider, but a lot of the time that just doesn't work. So why not lean into what they do well, which is to throw arm side fade, mix in a splitter, mix in a changeup, especially if that righty has good feel for a changeup. In terms of locations, you could front load in counts the changeup and push the splitter, which maybe is more of a chase pitch, harder to command, into deep count situations. So you could basically be the now retired Kyle Hendricks who actually threw 2 different changeups, or you could throw a changeup and a splitter, and that's exactly what Logan Gilbert is doing. I've always looked at Gilbert and thought that he was a great example of if you can't spin the ball, well, you gotta do something else really well, or just be an odd pitcher. And Gilbert throws really hard, and he has massive extension down the mound, so he checks some of the other boxes that allows this profile to work. But even Gilbert can get better, and he has with this new changeup alongside his more gyro-y splitter. The other thing I'll mention here that surprised me a lot, and I think I'm going to do another video on this because it feels very applicable to the present state of baseball, is that Logan Gilbert looked dramatically different in his first start of 2026. I can get into specifics in a second, but if you just look at his pitch plot year over year, you can see this. Lock in on the dark blue dots. That's his four-seam fastball. And look at how much they shift to what we call the 0 line, which is 0 inches of horizontal break, this vertical line right here. Gilbert is cutting the ball a lot more this season than he has in the past, and his slot is way up. He moved himself on this pronator supinator spectrum that we were just talking about to be more of a supinator. Put another way, it seems like he may have altered when that pronation is happening in his throw to be a bit later. He's delaying that pronation a bit more to the point where he's on the side of his four-seam fastball, so he's creating a bit more cut ride than he historically has, basically at any point in his career. And I think the addition of this changeup alongside the splitter is perhaps related to all of this. This changeup separating a lot from his arm angle, and I wonder if it's a byproduct of the fact that he can kind of cut this changeup to the point where he induces seam effects to create drop and to create run, and all of a sudden you have a pitcher who's doing multiple things really effectively. But it's not just Gilbert that changed his spin efficiency. I also noticed this trend with Jesus Luzardo, but in the opposite direction. His slot is down, and his spin efficiency has also dropped. So like Gilbert, he's delaying when that pronation is occurring in the throw on his four-seam fastball. He's less of a pronator now. Maybe it's a byproduct of the Phillies giving him a sweeper last season and that bleeding into his four-seam shape, but his sinker also looks a lot better, and he has a new splitter too, which is dropping a lot more than his prior changeup. I actually think he's a good example of a guy who could be a splitter and changeup candidate, like Gilbert if he wants, but it doesn't seem like he's thrown the old changeup yet this season. It might just be his new splitter, and that's totally fine. I definitely want to explore this topic in more detail because I think there are a lot of layers to it in terms of how malleable spin efficiency, which is the main objective variable we can look at to back into the pronation, supination spectrum. So I guess you're getting a bit of a preview of a video that I hope will come out in the next week or so. But one more thing before we get out of here today and get you back to some baseball. The last thing I want to bring up is the Nationals. Maybe they're not actually bad. They took 2 games from the Cubs at Wrigley, and their starting pitcher Sunday was literally the worst qualified starting pitcher in baseball last season, Jake Irvin. He had negative WAR, which is really difficult to do outside of Coors Field. So what happens when a new regime comes in and shakes things up? Players get better very quick, especially for a pitcher as under-optimized as Jake Irvin. Irvin was dreadful against left-handed hitters last season. A 5.38 Sierra with a 7% K- walk is not good. He was actually okay when he got into 2-strike spots, as most pitchers are, but prior to that, it was kind of painful to watch him. You bring in Paul Taboni, Simon Matthews, and others, and in one offseason, basically 4 or 5 months, we got a brand new Jake Irvin. The big picture point is that his slot is down a bit, and his efficiency fell, a recurring theme in this video if you can't tell. Irvin also dramatically changed up his mix. He cut his four-seam fastball usage to lefties down from 39% to 25% in his first start. He's now throwing about 10% cutter, 5 times more than he was throwing that pitch last season to lefties. He has a new sweeper with a ton of lift that I actually think could be effective oppo-handed, despite the fact most sweepers don't work oppo-handed. And he looked great against the Cubs' lefty bats, so we have early payoff. That sweeper is also a big part of his mix to righties now, which makes me think that apart from being a bit sharper against left-handed hitters, he's also probably going to level up against righties as well, making the net of his profile far better than the worst qualified starting pitcher in baseball. Through the first 5 or 6 games of the season, the Nationals are throwing just 44% four-seam and sinker. The biggest drop in baseball compared to last season. They almost fell 10 full percentage points. That's incredible. The writing was on the wall with this. We know when new brass comes into an organization, especially those coming from very progressive orgs, that they will kind of rip up the standing infrastructure and throw it out. We see this a bit with the Rockies as well. They might be a bit slower to change, but they're also down a bit in fastball usage. But this Nationals cut looks a lot like what the Marlins did between 24 and 25, and what the Red Sox did between 2023 and 2024. It's one of the most obvious ways for a new organization to come in, make their pitchers at the major league level immediately more successful, and then do what the Red Sox are doing, where you'll slowly see the four-seam usage start to tick back up as they start to identify the kinds of fastballs they want to throw as an organization. I hope you enjoyed the first weekend of baseball. This video was kind of combining a bunch of thoughts on a variety of things that I thought were cool, so I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I'm going to start working on this. Can you change spin efficiency to make all pitchers cut the ball? I already have some text out with people and a couple calls set up. So look forward to that on this channel. My Substack as well, which I didn't mention, is also active. We're ripping into the season. Basically going to try to post daily through the end of April or so until we get into more, 5 or 6 days a week. But there's a lot to talk about. That's $5 a month, $30 a year. I encourage you to check it out if you hung to the end of this video and are still listening to me ramble. Take care.